They uninvited me from the wedding. Small ceremony, they said, only immediate family. I watched from afar, then left quietly. A week later, they learned I paid for everything, from the dress to the venue, and pulled the plug on. The honeymoon funds, too. My name is Eleanor. For the last 30 years, my world has orbited around two sons, my late husband, Robert, and our daughter, Amelia. Robert was the steady, quiet warmth, the gravity that held us all together. When he died of a heart attack 3 years ago, the universe tilted on its axis, leaving just Amelia and me spinning in a new, colder orbit. She became my everything, the sole repository of all my love, my hopes, my history. The wedding, when she announced it, felt like the promise of a new star joining our small solar system, a chance to feel the warmth of family expand once more. Her fiancé, a young man named Mark, was ambitious and polished. He worked in finance, a world of numbers, and sharp angles that was foreign to me. But he made Amelia happy, and that was all that mattered. From the moment she said yes, my mind was a flurry of happy activity. I pictured the perfect day for her, the kind of day Robert and I had always dreamed of giving her. I still live in the sprawling suburban home where we raised her, a house filled with the ghosts of birthday parties and scraped knees, and I imagined hosting the engagement party in our garden, the one Robert had so lovingly tended. The planning began, and with it, the quiet hum of financial anxiety from Amelia. I'd overhear snippets of stressed phone calls when she thought I wasn't listening. The venue she adored was too expensive. The photographer whose work she'd admired for years was out of their budget. The dress that made her eyes light up was a pipe dream. Mark, it seemed, was determined they'd do it all themselves, a principle I could respect in theory, but which I saw was causing my daughter immense stress, dimming the joy that should have been hers. One evening, I found her at my kitchen table, head in her hands, staring at a spreadsheet of costs that was a sea of red ink. Tears were quietly tracing paths down her cheeks. My heart broke. All I wanted was to lift that burden, to give her the perfect day without the weight of debt. But I also saw the way Mark's jaw tightened whenever I offered to help. He was proud, and my help, I sensed, felt like a judgment on his ability to provide. So, I devised a plan. A quiet, secret act of love. The next morning, I called our family lawyer, a kind man who had managed our affairs for years. I want to set up a separate account, I explained, an anonymous one. I'm going to be paying for some wedding expenses, but I don't want my daughter or her fiancé to know the source. I want the vendors, the venue, the caterer, the dressmaker to simply be told that their invoices will be handled by a family benefactor through your office. The lawyer was hesitant, talking of transparency and potential complications, but he understood my motives. He helped me set up the trust. My first act was to call the coordinator at the beautiful old botanical garden Amelia had dreamed of. I told her the budgetary constraints had been lifted by a benefactor and to proceed with my daughter's original vision. I did the same with the photographer, the florist, the bakery she loved. I even called the bridal boutique and arranged to pay for the dress she had called the one, telling them to inform her it had been covered by a mysterious promotional giveaway. Each call, each secret payment was a thrill. I felt like a fairy godmother, silently weaving a magical day. For my daughter, a final grand gift from me, and in spirit, from the father she so dearly missed. I imagined her surprise and delight, the weight lifting from her shoulders, and I felt a profound sense of joy. It was, I thought, the purest expression of my love, providing for her happiness without any need for credit or thanks. As the months went on and the wedding day approached, however, a subtle chill began to permeate my relationship with Amelia. Our daily calls became shorter, more perfunctory. When I asked about details, she'd be vague. "Oh, Mark is handling that, Mom," she'd say. When I offered to help with addressing invitations, she told me Mark's mother had already volunteered. I felt a gradual, deliberate wall being built around the event, and I was clearly on the outside of it. Mark's influence was ever present. He'd answer questions directed at Amelia, his hand always on her arm, his smile never quite reaching. His eyes when he looked at me. I tried to dismiss my unease as the natural separation of a daughter cleaving to her new life, but it felt colder, more pointed than that. The final blow came 2 weeks before the wedding. They came to my house together, a united front. The air was thick with a tension I couldn't name. I served them iced tea on the porch, the same porch where Robert had taught Amelia to ride her bike. Amelia couldn't meet my eyes. She stared at her glass, twisting it in her hands. It was Mark who spoke. "Eleanor," he began, using my first name, in a way that always felt less familiar and more like a corporate maneuver. "Amelia and I have made a decision about the ceremony. We've been feeling a lot of pressure, and we've decided we need to make it much, much smaller. More intimate." I looked at Amelia, waiting for her to explain. She remained silent, her focus entirely on the condensation of her glass. "What do you mean, smaller?" I asked, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. "We're cutting the guest list way down," Mark continued smoothly. "We want it to be just a very small, private affair. Only immediate family." The phrase hung in the air. Immediate family. The words were logical, reasonable, and yet they made no sense at all. I was her mother, her only living parent. I was immediate family. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Amelia, sweetheart." "What is he saying?" She finally looked up, her eyes swimming with a mixture of tears and something that looked like resolve. "It's just us, Mom, and Mark's parents, and our siblings. That's it. It's what we want. It's less stressful for everyone." The blood drained from my face. It wasn't a small ceremony, it was a surgical exclusion. His parents were immediate family. Her brother-in-law-to-be was immediate family. But I, her mother, was not. I was the stress that was being cut from the guest list. My mind reeled, a torrent of memories flooding the void left by her words. The sleepless nights when she was a baby, the hours spent sewing Halloween costumes, the way I held her for an entire day after her first major heartbreak. I thought of the secret joy I had felt paying for her dress, the venue, the flowers, all the elements of the beautiful wedding they were now uninviting me from. The irony was so staggering, so cruel. It was almost absurd. They were shutting me out of a day that my love had built. I looked at my daughter, the beautiful woman I had raised, and saw a stranger looking back at me, her face a mask of anxious determination, her words clearly not her own. I looked at Mark, his expression smooth and unreadable, and I saw the architect of this moment. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. Something inside me went very still and very cold. The hurt was so profound it was beyond tears. It was a quiet, tectonic shift in the landscape of my soul. I had poured everything I had into my daughter's happiness, and in return, she had handed me an invitation to be absent from it. I stood up, my movements calm and measured. I took their half-empty glasses of iced tea. "I see," I said, my voice eerily serene. "Well, it is your day, and you must do what you feel is right." The relief on their faces was palpable. They had expected a fight, tears, recriminations. My quiet acquiescence was an unexpected gift, and they accepted it greedily. They made their excuses and left quickly, leaving me alone in the silent house, the sound of their car fading down the street. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring out at the garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. The wedding they were planning, the one I was paying for, was going to be beautiful, and I was not going to be there. The fairy godmother had been barred from the ball, but the story, I realized, was not over. A new, cold resolve was beginning to form. They wanted a simple wedding, free of the stress of my presence. I would give them simplicity, more simplicity than they could ever have imagined. The silence that descended after the front door clicked shut behind them was a physical entity. It was heavier than grief, colder than sorrow. It was the sound of a door being slammed on 30 years of my life, on every lullaby I'd ever sung, every fevered forehead I'd ever cooled. I sank onto the sofa, the one where I had taught Amelia to read, and for the first time since my husband Robert died, I felt an emptiness so complete, so absolute, that it seemed to hollow out my very bones. This wasn't the ache of loss. This was the sharp, clean amputation of betrayal. I spent that night wandering through the house, a ghost in my own museum of memories. I picked up a framed photo from the mantelpiece. A gap-toothed 6-year-old Amelia on her first day of school, clutching my hand as if she'd never let go. I traced the outline of her small face, the echo of her tiny, trusting hand in mine. A phantom pain. I stood in her childhood bedroom, untouched for years, the faded unicorn wallpaper and the shelf of worn-out storybooks, a testament to a girl who no longer existed, a girl who had been replaced by a woman who could look her mother in the eye and declare her presence a stress. The phrase immediate family played on a cruel loop in my mind. Mark's parents, whom Amelia had known for less than 2 years, were immediate. His brother was immediate, but I, the woman who had given her life, the one who held every one of her stories, was not. I was an inconvenience, a complication to be simplified. And as the initial shock gave way to a glacial calm, I began to understand. This wasn't a decision born of my daughter's heart. This was an eviction orchestrated by her fiancé and signed off on by her. They were starting their new life by surgically removing me from it. And yet, my love, my secret, anonymous love, was paying for the very stage on which this rejection would be performed. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. They were celebrating their union in a garden I had secured for them, with music I had chosen, eating a cake I had paid for. My generosity had been used to build the very walls that were now shutting me out. By morning, the profound sadness had crystallized into a hard, clear resolve. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was a cold, quiet decision made in the clear light of a devastating truth. An uninvited guest does not foot the bill for the party. My contributions were intended as a gift of love to be shared in a moment of familial celebration. Since I was no longer considered part of that family celebration, the gift was null and void. My first call was to my lawyer. He listened patiently as I explained the situation in a calm, even voice that betrayed none of the turmoil inside me. I recounted the conversation, the exact words: small ceremony, immediate family, too much stress. I see, he said, his voice laced with a sympathy he was too professional to state outright. Eleanor, what would you like me to do? I want you to halt all future payments from the benefactor trust, effective immediately, I instructed. The wedding is in 2 weeks. I want you to contact every vendor on our list, the venue, the caterer, the florist, the musicians, and inform them that the benefactor has withdrawn all further funding. The balances due are now the responsibility of Ms. Amelia and Mr. Mark. I was specific. Any service or item already delivered and paid for in full, like her wedding dress, is to be considered a final gift. Anything outstanding is their burden to bear now. And the honeymoon? He asked gently. He knew I'd arranged a surprise, all-inclusive package to Hawaii to be presented to them at their reception. Cancel it, I said without hesitation. Please ensure the funds are returned to the trust. There will be no wedding gift. My second call was to a travel agent. I booked a single first-class ticket to a quiet, remote coastal inn in Maine for the week of the wedding, a place of wind and waves and solitude, a place where no one knew my name. The following 2 weeks were the strangest of my life. I lived in a state of suspended animation, waiting. I heard nothing from Amelia or Mark. I imagined them blissfully unaware, caught up in the final flurry of wedding preparations, checking off lists, attending fittings, completely oblivious to the financial storm that was about to break over their heads. The vendors, my lawyer later informed me, had been instructed to send their final, now unfunded invoices 1 week before the wedding date. The calls would start any day now. And what would I do when they called me, frantic and confused? The thought brought me no pleasure, only a weary sadness. I would tell them the truth, that the anonymous benefactor, upon learning of the altered nature of the guest list, felt their contribution was no longer appropriate. I would not reveal myself. The anonymity that had been my tool for generosity would now be my shield. The day of the wedding arrived, bright and painfully beautiful. I did not go to Maine. I couldn't. I had to see it for myself. I dressed in a simple, elegant gray dress, the color of dignity, I told myself, the color of a cloudy sky. I drove my car to the Botanical Gardens, the venue I had chosen for its serene beauty, and parked on a quiet side street with a clear view of the main entrance. I sat there for over an hour, a silent observer at my own daughter's life. I watched as the guests arrived, laughing and dressed in their finest. I saw Mark's parents step out of a car, his mother looking radiant, greeted with hugs by her son. I saw the groomsmen, the bridesmaids, and then I saw her, Amelia. She arrived in a vintage car, stepping out onto the curb like a princess in a fairy tale. The dress, the one I had paid for, was breathtaking. She was the most beautiful bride I had ever seen. A wave of love so fierce it physically hurt washed over me, followed immediately by the crushing tide of my exclusion. She was radiant, smiling. For the photographer, blissfully unaware that the woman who gave her life was watching her from 100 yards away like a stranger, I watched her laugh, her head thrown back in joy. I saw Mark come out to greet her, taking her hand, his expression one of proud ownership. I saw them stand together, the perfect couple, about to enter the perfect wedding venue. My heart ached with a love that had nowhere to go. I didn't need to see any more. I had borne witness. I had seen her on her wedding day, just as any mother would wish to do, and I had seen that she was happy without me. Once she and Mark disappeared inside the grand conservatory, my purpose for being there was complete. I started the car, my hands steady on the wheel. I drove away from the beautiful garden, from the sounds of celebratory music just beginning to drift on the air. There were no tears. I felt hollowed out, empty, but also strangely calm. The final act of love and letting go was complete. I drove home, the late afternoon sun in my eyes, knowing that the phone calls would likely start on Monday. The honeymoon was canceled. The bills were coming due, and their simple, intimate wedding was about to become very, very complicated. The weekend after the wedding was an exercise in absolute stillness. I didn't leave my house. I unplugged the phone, silencing the outside world. I sat in my garden, the one Robert had so lovingly curated, and simply existed. The quiet wasn't the frantic, aching silence that had followed his death. This was different. It was the calm, heavy silence of a decision made, of a chapter closed. There was no joy in what I had done, but there was a profound and unyielding sense of rightness. An action had been met with its equal and opposite reaction. It was the simple physics of self-respect. I thought about Amelia, my daughter. I saw her in my mind's eye, a vibrant kaleidoscope of memories. Her tiny hand gripping my finger. Her face, bright with triumph after her first school play. Her tear-streaked cheeks after her first teenage heartbreak, when she'd laid her head in my lap and whispered, "You're my best friend, Mom." Where had that girl gone? When had she learned to value my presence so little that she could discard it like an old coat? The influence of her new husband, Mark, was undeniable. He had the kind of smooth corporate ambition that saw emotions as inefficiencies and family obligations as potential liabilities. But Amelia had made the choice. She had stood beside him, her silence a ringing endorsement of his words. She had looked at me and agreed that I was not immediate family. That was the thought I kept returning to. The cold, clinical precision of that phrase. It wasn't a messy, emotional outburst. It was a calculated redefinition of my role in her life. I was being demoted, reassigned to some outer circle of relevance, while I was simultaneously, secretly, funding the very heart of the celebration. The dissonance was too great to bear silently. My actions weren't about revenge. They were about restoring a kind of natural order. My love, and the financial support that was its expression, was not an entitlement. It was a gift, and a gift requires a gracious recipient. When the recipient bars the door, the gift, by necessity, remains with the giver. The silence broke on Monday afternoon. The phone rang, and I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, it rang again, and again. On the fourth try, I picked it. Up. Eleanor. It was Mark. His voice was tight, stretched thin over a wire of barely controlled fury. "We have a very serious problem." "Oh?" I said, my voice deliberately calm and neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't play dumb with me," he snapped, his professional veneer gone. "The venue just called Amelia. They said the final payment from the benefactor was declined. The caterer called 5 minutes later. The florist, the band, they're all calling Eleanor. They're demanding payment in full. What did you do?" "I'm not sure I follow, Mark," I said, and I was surprised at how steady my voice was. You and Amelia made it very clear that the wedding was a small, private affair and that you were handling all the arrangements. I wasn't involved. The anonymous benefactor, he said, his voice rising. The trust that was paying for everything. The wedding planner said the funding was pulled on Friday afternoon. That was you. It had to be you. You're the only one who could have. His voice trailed off, as if he realized he was admitting his own financial inadequacy. Out loud. It sounds like a very stressful situation, I offered, a statement of fact with no hint of sympathy. I'm sure you and Amelia will figure it out. Figure it out? We're talking about nearly $60,000, Eleanor. We don't just have that kind of money lying around. How could you do this to us? How could you humiliate Amelia? Like this? Humiliate her? I asked, and now a sliver of ice entered my tone. Was it more humiliating than a mother being told she is not welcome at her only daughter's wedding? Was it more humiliating than being informed you are not? Immediate family. You cannot cast someone out and still expect them to warm your house, Mark. The two are mutually exclusive. He was sputtering now, talking about lawyers, about promises. I simply said, you'll have to take that up with the benefactor, whoever. They may be. And I quietly hung up the phone. An hour later, it was Amelia. She was sobbing, her words tumbling out in a torrent of anger and hysteria. Mom, how could you? How could you do this? This was supposed to be the happiest week of my life, and it's a nightmare. The venue is threatening legal action. I'm so embarrassed. Why would you be so cruel? This was the call that mattered. This was the one that hurt. It wasn't cruelty, Amelia, I said, my voice aching with a sorrow she would never understand. It was a consequence. A very simple one. A consequence for what? For wanting a small wedding? She cried. No, sweetheart. A consequence. For telling me, your mother, that I was not welcome at that wedding. For telling me that I was no longer your immediate family. I let that sit in the air for a moment. I have been paying for every detail of your dream wedding for months, in secret, because I love you and I wanted you to have a perfect day. I paid for that dress you wore. I paid for the deposit on that beautiful garden. I did it because it brought me joy to see you happy, to be part of that happiness. But a wedding is a celebration of family. When you decided I was no longer part of the family being celebrated, the celebration I was funding ceased to exist. The benefactor's gift was for a family event. You chose to make it a different kind of event. The benefactor, it seems, chose to withdraw. She was quiet now. Her, sobs subsiding into hiccuping breaths. You paid for it all? She whispered. Every invoice that has been settled, yes. From the photographer to the cake. A final gift. And the honeymoon? She asked, her voice small, almost childlike. Mark and I, we were supposed to leave for Hawaii on Wednesday. The travel agent called this morning. She said the payment was canceled. The honeymoon was my wedding gift to you both, I said. A gift to celebrate a wedding I was not invited to attend. You must surely see the impossibility of that, Amelia. But what are we going to do? She pleaded. We can't afford this. He's losing his mind. He says we might have to sell his car, take out a second mortgage on our apartment. The reality of their situation, the one they had created, was crashing down on her. I felt a pang of my old, maternal instinct, the urge to soothe her, to fix it, to make it all go away. But I held my ground. The lesson, however painful, had to be learned. That, I said, my voice full of a sadness that felt centuries old, is something you and your husband will have to figure out. You have a life, Amelia. You told me so yourself. It seems this is now a part of it. I ended the call, my hand trembling as I placed the receiver back in its cradle. I had not yelled. I had not accused. I had simply held up a mirror to her actions, and the reflection was devastating. I took no joy in their panic, only a deep, profound sorrow that it had come to this. But as I sat there in the quiet of my home, I felt something else too, the unfamiliar, steely feeling of a boundary drawn and held. I had respected myself, and in doing so, I had finally, truly begun to simplify my own life. The weeks following that final explosive phone call with Amelia were some of the quietest of my life. A thick, profound silence descended, a quiet that was neither peaceful nor raging, but simply empty. There were no more hysterical calls, no angry texts. It was as if a door had been firmly, definitively shut. I didn't reach out, and neither did they. I found myself adrift in a sea of unspoken words and unresolved pain, my days stretching out before me with a terrifying lack of purpose. My role as mother, the central organizing principle of my life for 3 decades, felt like it had been declared redundant. I learned about their life in snippets through the carefully curated world of social media and the occasional, hesitant remark from a mutual acquaintance. I saw photos of the car Mark had to sell, a sleek sports sedan he'd been so proud of, replaced by a more practical, humbler model. I heard that their planned trip to Hawaii had become a weekend camping trip, in a state park 2 hours away. I saw pictures of them smiling, always smiling, but there was a new, strained quality to their grins, a brittleness I recognized. There was no joy in seeing these consequences unfold. Each small piece of news was a fresh pang of sorrow, a reminder of the chasm that had opened between us. During this time, I forced myself to build a new routine. I started walking every morning, exploring the quiet trails in the nature preserve near my home. I joined a book club filled with intelligent, witty women my own age who talked about literature and politics and their travels, not just their children. I took a pottery class, finding a strange therapeutic solace in the messy, unforgiving process of shaping clay. I was slowly, clumsily building a life that was entirely my own, a life in which I was the protagonist, not a supporting character in someone else's story. The loneliness was still a frequent visitor, but it no longer owned the house. The silence from Amelia lasted for nearly 4 months. Then, on my birthday, a small plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a simple card, a print of a Monet painting with no pre-written sentiment. Below the image, in my daughter's familiar handwriting, were 3 words: "Thinking of you, Mom." There was no apology, no explanation, just a tiny, fragile flag of truce waved from across a vast, silent battlefield. I stared at it for a long time, my heart a confused mix of hope and deep-seated caution. I didn't call her. A week later, I sent back a postcard with a picture of a rose from my garden. My message was equally spare. "Thank you for the card." A few more weeks passed. Then another text. "Would you be willing to meet for coffee? Just me, please." We met at a small, neutral cafe downtown, a place with no shared history for us. I arrived first, choosing a small table in a quiet corner. When Amelia walked in, I was struck by how much older she looked. The youthful, carefree glow she'd had on her wedding day was gone, replaced by a visible weariness. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. For a long time, she just stared into her cup of coffee. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. And the words were so full of genuine anguish that they seemed to break the air between us. There's no excuse, there's no good reason. I was weak and I was a coward, and I let Mark convince me that your love was a complication, an obligation. I let him make me feel like I had to choose between his pride and your heart. And I made the wrong choice, the cruelest choice. She began to cry then, not the hysterical sobs from our last phone call, but the quiet, ragged tears of profound regret. "He was so insecure about the money," she continued, her voice thick, "about what you could provide that he couldn't. His parents fueled it. They made me feel like your generosity was a weapon, a way of controlling me. And instead of defending you, instead of defending our relationship, I took the easy way. Out. I shut you out. Telling you that you weren't immediate family. It was the most shameful, horrible thing I've ever done in my life." I listened, my own tears welling up. I let her speak. Let her pour out the whole sorry story of her insecurities, her husband's pride, the slow erosion of her own judgment. She told me about the awful months they'd had, the constant arguments about money, The crushing weight of the debt, the shame of having to explain to friends why their lavish wedding had ended in a financial nightmare. We almost didn't make it, she confessed. The stress, the resentment, it almost broke us. We're in counseling now. Mark is trying to understand. But this isn't about him. This is about me. I broke your heart, Mom. I know I did. And I don't know if it can ever be fixed. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cold. I'm glad you're getting help, Amelia, I said softly. And I'm glad you're here now, telling me the truth. Forgiveness wasn't a word I was ready for. Not yet. The wound was too deep. But understanding, that was a start. The relationship we had before, that's gone, sweetheart. It was broken that day on the porch. But maybe we can build something new. And so we began. The process was slow, cautious. We started with coffee once a week. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. I learned to see her not just as my daughter, but as a woman struggling within her own marriage. She, in turn, began to see me not as an endlessly providing mother figure, but as Eleanor, a woman with her own feelings, her own dignity, her own breaking point. The boundary I had drawn remained softer now, but still present. My financial help was no longer on the table. Our relationship had to be built on something more substantial than that. A year after the wedding, I decided to take the funds from the benefactor trust, the money that was supposed to be for her honeymoon, and use them for my own. I started planning a trip, a real adventure. I found myself looking at maps of places I'd only ever dreamed of, places Robert and I had talked about visiting someday. I thought about the stark, beautiful landscapes of Patagonia, the ancient temples of Kyoto. I even found myself reading about Morocco, about the bustling souks of Marrakesh and the quiet mountain towns. I felt a pull towards worlds so different from my own, a desire to see what other kinds of lives, what other kinds of families existed under the sun. My life is different now. The pain of my daughter's rejection has faded into a scar, a permanent reminder of a painful lesson learned by us both. Our new relationship is fragile, but it is honest. It is built not on assumption and obligation, but on the careful, deliberate choice to connect. I learned that my love, as unconditional as it felt, could not be a doormat for disrespect. By pulling the plug on the party, I hadn't just created a consequence for her. I had created a new beginning for myself, a future where I was finally, truly simplifying my life down to what was real.